All right, well, hello, welcome everybody to our LinkedIn Live today. We're going to be going over the mentor mindset and engaging the adolescent brain and how that really fits into the fellowship using the science of engagement, which is a fellowship program for fifth grade through 12th grade teachers, math, science, STEM related fields, CTE. We've got a bunch of teachers joining this summer. We're joined today by Dr. David Yeager. He's going to talk about his book, about the research behind the fellowship. And then I'm going to share some of the details about how your teachers can join and joined a group of about 200 teachers from around the country. So, Dr. Yeager, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Great to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I just want to let you know you can ask questions in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them. The content of this talk is adapted in part from my book, 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People, which tackles the question of how we can kind of stop fearing adolescent development and start harnessing it to promote a better society and to motivate young people. But I want to start with a puzzle. We're seeing a lot of talk these days about changes in technology and changes in education. And there's something that as increasingly has been called the myth of the self-directed AI-powered learner. And look, I'm not saying it's a myth that learners can be self-directed, or nor that it's a myth that AI can be useful. Instead, it's this vision that often seems mythological, that if only we can have the best algorithm serving up the best difficult content to students, challenging them, pushing their minds to farther places, that adolescents would sit there and say, yes, I'm so excited. I love this whole situation happening to me. Thank you very much, technocratic education leaders, for empowering this robot to tell me what to do and make me feel confused and lost, so that way I can then learn and grow my knowledge, right? And I just think that's not likely the case. I don't think that learning for a lot of young people is purely the result of some kind of rational, goal-directed process by which they develop cognitive skills in order to compete on the labor market. I think that's what happens at a macro level, but at an individual psychology level, I think what happens is that young people have a lot of different competing priorities and things they're worried about. And these may be very different from the goals of the designers of education systems. And to give you a little evidence on this, I want to give you some data from a large nationally representative study that I led and conducted with many colleagues, Carol Dweck and Greg Walton and Angela Duckworth, among others. In this study, and we've replicated it around the world, this kind of finding, we asked ninth graders early in the school year, imagine later today, the adults in your school are going to give you a choice of two kinds of problems to work on in class. One would be an easy problem where you won't learn anything new, but you'll get a perfect score, most likely. Or a challenging problem that might make you think really hard and you might get wrong, but you'll learn a lot. Okay. Now, of course, the goal of education is to learn new things you haven't already mastered. And yet what we find is that 63% of adolescents choose the easy problem. Only 37% chose the challenging problem. And there's a couple lessons from this kind of finding, which, by the way, isn't limited to this way we measured it. We just ran a new study where we got the same results, basically. The one way to interpret this is that if all we do is focus on the content we put in front of young people and presume that they will love that challenge and seek it out and try to push themselves to this uncomfortable space of their zone of proximal development and embrace the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, we're probably fooling ourselves for at least 2/3 of young people. And that's potentially an issue because we don't want to design an education system that only works for 1/3 of kids. Now, you could think of this as a specific example of a broader problem of disengagement. So disengagement is generally the idea that when we present young people with learning opportunities, they don't fully embrace them and learn from them in the way that we would hope. And what we find is that actually disengagement goes down every single year young people are in formal education. So here's a reanalysis of two prominent data sets that I published a few years ago. What you see is that compared to like 8 or 9-year-olds, what you see is that every single year of education intrinsic motivation goes down. That is, they're less likely to choose to learn new things, challenging things, etc. And this disengagement in our conventional public schooling system, um, uh, you might think, well, what if we just made education more interesting, right? Well, you still have the problem of young people approaching the technology or the projects or whatever it is and thinking that that's a good use of their time and that they would like to be challenged in that way. So I don't think we can put this just on the formal education system. I think it's a bigger issue of kind of a mismatch between the way that we structure education and how young people are encountering it, not just in terms of the content, but foreshadowing also in terms of our relationships with young people. Now, this disengagement causes a problem, not just for the kids, because of course they learn less when they're less engaged, but also for the adults in the schools. Um, I love the RAND American Educator panel. If you haven't checked out this data set, I highly recommend it. I'm a huge fan of nationally representative studies where people basically do the hard work to construct rigorous samples that can make generalizable claims. And RAND is really the only vendor in the business that maintains a panel of educators randomly selected from across the country. So I recommend you check out their data, supported by the Gates Foundation. But at any rate, they release a report every year for the last few years on teacher stress. And they ask teachers about the largest sources of stress. And the number one source of stress is managing student disengagement and misbehavior. Okay, even more so than low salary or a bad administrator or working hours, et cetera. And this is especially true among relatively inexperienced teachers, 0 to 5 years. So that's the graph on the right. And this is a big issue, right? Because there are a lot of reforms out there to try to address the teacher shortage and the teacher crisis, right? And yes, of course, teachers should be paid more and administrators should be less intrusive and more trustworthy and all the other things that would be great. But if we don't fundamentally address the student engagement problem, then we are leaving the largest share of variance on the table with respect to retaining teachers, because we know that stress can lead to burnout and burnout can lead to retention. And so it's not a surprise that actually inexperienced teachers are the most likely to quit the job. And furthermore, the least prepared teachers, the teachers who have the fewest skills in managing student behavior, are also the most likely to leave the profession. And if you haven't been following Michael Martyr on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. He's a colleague of mine, someone who I admire a lot. He's always analyzing large public data sets to try to give us a better picture of what's happening in public education. Now, he's a physicist, so he's just got this amazing way of thinking about large data sets and then simplifying that information. And so here's a set of graphs that Martyr produced, and you can find on his LinkedIn page. And this is retention of teachers in Texas by years taught. And what you see is that teachers leave the profession the longer that they're in it, right? So you don't always retain people. But basically on the left is people trained at colleges and universities, and they are retained at the highest rate. So even 9-10 years in, they're still there at 60% rate. Whereas uncredentialed, non-licensed teachers all the way on the right are retained at more like a 30% rate after 9 years. And you see this precipitous slope among the no licensed group. And there are a lot of ways to read this. These are different kinds of people, they're different kinds of pathways. But one way to think about it is that the less confident you feel managing student behavior, which is one of the kinds of things you learn when you do student teaching and you're certified, the more likely you are to quit the job. And furthermore, there are very few programs out there that actually help in-service teachers or alt-certified teachers figure out the student behavior side. There are a lot of in-service programs to adopt the new writing curriculum or change how you're, using Khan Academy or to start adopting Zern. Like the content and the curriculum, vendors are constantly selling you stuff in schools to learn how to use their content. But the subtle social dynamics of human interactions, it's very hard to get them right in general, and it's especially hard to do so when you're already running around with your hair on fire as an inexperienced teacher trying to make your way in the classroom. And I think that leads to a kind of vicious cycle where student disengagement, which has many causes, leads to student misbehavior, low student performance, which then in turn makes teachers feel burnt out, stressed, and eventually it causes them to leave, which then causes students to be taught by more inexperienced teachers who do less good of a job because they're inexperienced and they have less training. And then therefore students learn less, might misbehave more, etc. And to be honest, I don't see this trend changing without rather dramatic implementation of new ideas, because current ideas are not really investing in retaining our teachers, and also are focusing far more on kind of technocratic solutions than on the student behavior and misbehavior solutions. So this is a big problem, something we want to do something about in our work. So as a psychologist, I want to say, all right, well, let's think about the opposite. How do we start creating student engagement? Let's do the opposite of that disengagement cycle. And to do that, one useful place to start is to imagine what engagement looks like. So what is the good set of behaviors we're actually trying to promote in our students? I asked a bunch of superintendents this question. Here's the kinds of things that they said. They said willing independent learning among students, not just compliance. So students who are seeking out challenging learning experiences, they're not just doing it out of fear of punishment or to get a specific grade. Conceptual learning, not just algorithmic learning. So this is students who understand the deeper issues in a set of problems, not just memorizing tips or secrets. So a classic example is students have told us sometimes, well, yeah, a fraction just has the small number on top and the large number on bottom. And that's their definition of the fraction. And you understand, it's horrifying if you're a math teacher, but you understand why students would say that. They'd say that if some teacher was trying to get, or some tutor or somebody was trying to get them through a stack of worksheets, and they're like, look, for all these problems, small number on top, right? So that's not engagement. That's just surface level memorization to move on, and then you're setting yourself up for failure later. Instead, we want students to understand the deeper features of what they're learning, so that way they can apply it as the concept changes in future courses. Ideally, when students are engaged, students love the class more and they earn higher test scores. So it's not this old dichotomy that we remember from No Child Left Behind, where it's like suck the joy out of learning to increase reading scores. It's more like when students engage more, they want to be in school. They like try to go there on purpose, and they do better, right? Because they're engaged and they're learning. So that's a goal. And then of course, there should be less frustration for teachers. So now we've got a vision. This is kind of what we're going for. And what's our psychological analysis of how to get there? Well, there are a lot of ideas for how to promote engagement, but let me just give you the punchline from 100 years of developmental science of adolescence, okay? And this is, if you've read my book, this is more or less chapter 1. Carol Dweck and Ron Dahl and I have a paper on this argument, Yeager, Dahl, Dweck in 2018, if you want to read more. But here's the main punchline in 4 points. First is that teenagers' brains make them hypersensitive about status, how they look to others, and how they feel about themselves. That is, they prioritize their reputations. They want to look good, not just dominant, although that's, some people want that, and not just cool, right? But they, deeper down, they want to look as though they're a person of value and worth in the eyes of other people whose opinions they care about. And when you say it that way, you realize this is not a crazy desire for an adolescent, or really for any organism, right? So think about humans in our evolutionary history. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, as we're roaming the savannah, it really mattered if you were included in the group. Because if you're a part of a roving band of teenage kids that are going around trying to hunt or protect the tribe, and you're viewed as worthless, at some point, they're just going to leave you behind. And now you're alone in the savannah. You'll never be able to sleep because humans can't sleep in trees. And if you sleep on the ground, an animal will kill you. And so you're alone until you die, basically, if you're viewed as worthless. And Pubertal hormones start sensitizing the brain to that social reputation because it's so critical for survival. But why puberty? Well, because when you're younger, like you're 3 years old, it's like okay if you're not doing something to keep everybody alive. Like no one looks at a 3-year-old and says, "You didn't kill a woolly mammoth today, so see you later." Right? When you're a child, you're protected by your parents or family. But if you're a 16-year-old sitting there like a lump on a log, at some point people are going to stop bringing you meat and protecting you from others and watching out for you as you sleep. Okay. So it's a long way of saying that our brains evolved, the argument it goes, in part to be sensitive to social cues that are really subtle. So that way we are attuned to the possibility that we are viewed as socially worthless on the one hand or socially valuable on the other. Now, that sensitivity enhances fear of failure in hard courses. Why is that? Obviously, there wasn't formal schooling hundreds of thousands of years ago, but being incompetent publicly in front of lots of other people is one of the surest ways to convince those other people that you are not valuable. And so one of the big fears is that adolescents worry that they are publicly outing themselves as lacking in competence or lacking in social value when they fail. Now, that might have happened a long time ago if it was, with regards to starting a relationship or hunting an animal. These days, it's like raising your hand and doing a problem on the board or holding someone's hand for the first time, right? Or maybe trying to merge on the freeway for the first time, right? These are terrifying prospects. They could bring with them either physical death, like in the case of merging on the freeway incorrectly as a 16-year-old, or social death in the case of looking dumb in front of everybody or having unreciprocated affections for somebody, right? So one way to think about this is that social failures, like moments of humiliation and shame, tend to leave an imprint on us. These are things that we remember for a really long time. That many people can think back on that moment where they got humiliated or rejected or falsely accused of something. It's like you can feel it in your stomach often, okay? And that's kind of what psychologists call one trial learning, that there's an intense social experience that then gets encoded in memory because the brain thinks this is really important for my survival in the future, okay? Now, this sensitivity to the fear of failure is infuriating for teachers because they're sitting there saying, dude, you got the problem wrong. Just tell me why you were confused and then we can fix it. Or just come up to the board, please, and do the right. It's like it's exhausting for adults to have to manage this. But from their perspective, it really is a life or death proposition. So we have to be sympathetic to it, even if we're not thrilled that they have this fear of failure that we don't love. Now, that concern with social life or death is not all bad. It also is part of what helps people transition to adulthood successfully. So the thrill of winning admiration and a good reputation feels amazing during adolescence. So like if you think about the fact that on any given day, if I'm a middle school teacher and I see a teenager, that's the day on which they have the most testosterone they've ever had in their entire lives, that day. And then the next day when I see them, that's the day on which they now have the most testosterone they've ever had in their entire lives. And that causes this, sensitivity to failure, but also this sensitivity to the thrill of social success and the possibility that they could feel amazing. And there are lots of things that are socially dangerous or physically dangerous that are actually good for us, that if we don't have the courage to try them, we never learn. So for instance, people who never learn how to merge on the freeway and drive 80 miles an hour as teenagers, very often they never learn how to do that. They just drive on the feeder the rest of their lives and are just late to everything, right? Similarly, if you never learn when someone reciprocates your affection, if you've never had the prospect of being rejected with holding someone's hand or asking them out, then you might never learn how to form that connection and you might die alone. There's a very real risk that if you don't overcome the fear of social failure in adolescence for specific tasks, then you won't learn those tasks. And so you can think of the the adolescent brain as sometimes taking risks that are not dumb risks, but instead are risks that are about how to learn how to be a socially successful person. And once you understand that, then it's possible to harness that sensitivity and use it to promote deeper engagement and learning. I mean, this is a version of why project-based learning is so great, because it just feels so different to write an essay just to please a teacher on the one hand, or at least to not disappoint a teacher, versus on the other hand, write an essay that you're going to read to city council on behalf of poor children in your community so that you can be recognized as a leader in your community who's advocating for others. The latter feels amazing. It's high status, it's prestigious, it brings a positive reputation. The former is a threat to your reputation. All you could do is just have a teacher humiliate you, right? So once we understand this, then it's possible to start reframing educational experiences as aligned with the deepest motivations that young people have. I like to say that it's not the case that adolescents aren't goal-directed or can't think about the future. They think about the future all the time. It's just not always the future we want them to be thinking about, right? We want them to factor trinomials and do stoichiometry, and then when they don't, we're like, you can't get motivated. But if you ask them to sneak out of the house, go to a party they weren't supposed to go to, they're thinking weeks in advance. Who do I have to lie to? Where's the map of the sewers, right? So this is a long way of saying that if we can reframe the adolescent brain as not a liability, but actually as a strength, and then start aligning our educational experiences with what most engages that adolescent brain, then we might have a shot of addressing this engagement problem and then making students' lives better, but also teachers' lives. Now, what doesn't work? What doesn't work is our instincts to do what I call grown-splaining. And now I'm going to mansplain grown-splaining to you. This is simply the idea that we think, oh, with my smart adult brain, I can just tell you what I think and what to do. And if you don't do it, then it means you're not listening, you don't care, you're short-sighted, etc. When we're grown-splaining, we're talking to adolescents the way Americans speak in foreign countries where they don't speak the language, where they just yell English louder, for example. Okay, that's kind of like grown-splaining. And it turns out that that is an affront to status and respect, and it turns off adolescent motivation and listening. There's a beautiful study that illustrates this by Jennifer Silk and my collaborator Ron Dahl and others, where they took teenagers in the lab and they had them listen to audio of their moms nagging them. And here's an example of what the mom said. So they're listening on headphones, the magnet was whirring around their head, and the teen hears this from the mom. The actual mom recorded this. One thing that bothers me about you is that you get upset over minor issues. I could tell you to take your shoes from downstairs. You'll get mad that you have to pick them up and actually walk upstairs and put them in your room. You'll get mad if I tell you that your room is a little dirty and it just needs sweeping and dusting. You get upset if your sisters want to do something that you don't agree on, but 3 of them do, and you don't want to do it. You get upset too easily, and you just need to calm that down. All right, so what happened in the adolescent brain when teenagers heard this from their moms? By the way, it could have been dads. I'll tell you what never happened. 0% of the time did the listeners say, Mom, you have a point. I'm really glad you raised all these issues. So thanks for the feedback. Good chat. And I'll get back to you soon. Right. So that didn't happen. Instead, what you see is strong negative emotion, which you see in the top right, increase in the affective networks, and very little thinking about how to change. Those are the decreases in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is about kind of goal-directed logical reasoning, and the temporoparietal junction in the bottom right, the TPJ, that's like mind reading, like inferring the intent of the speaker. So we're having often the opposite effect. And the reason why we often do this, of course, is because we think we have the expertise as the adults. We know what we're doing and they don't. And if only they would listen to us, then they would be smart, right? But that comes across as an insult to their competence and ability, etc. So how do we stop fearing adolescent development, stop grown-splaining and pushing them away, and instead start harnessing adolescent development for the sake of learning and growth in our society? My hypothesis is that we're stuck between 2 extremes. We think you can either be rigorous or supportive. On the rigor side, we think hey, I got high standards. I'm the tough guy. It's great. Downside, I'm an authoritarian sadist, right? It just feels like the price of doing business. That if I'm going to maintain the rigor of my discipline, like math or physics or literature, then I've got to be tough. And I can't care about your feelings because it's just too hard. Or some people think, my job is to be supportive. What I want more than anything is at the end of the day for them to put their head on their pillow and know I cared for them. So I'm caring and loving. That's positive. But downside, I'm a wimp and a pushover, right? It's like we think we only have two choices, either Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator or Arnold Schwarzenegger in Twins. And my argument is that actually you don't have to choose between these two. You can do both. And when you do, you can capture adolescent motivation. And the way we do that is more than just growth mindset, which is a concept that I find very useful. But it's about creating the conditions for growth. It's what I call the mentor mindset. And the way to do that is to maintain very high standards and very high support. That's in the top right of this diagram. Okay. So this is somebody who says, look, I'm going to give you hard work. I'm taking you seriously. This is really challenging, but I'm going to walk the journey with you until you complete it. Okay. Like it's too important to me. I care about you too much to let you meet low standards, but I also care about you too much to fail to support you as you try to meet those standards. Now, one opposite of the mentor mindset is in the top left. This is the conventional idea where you think it's either standards or support. That's what I call the enforcer mindset. There, you're just enforcing rigorous standards. End of story. If people don't meet it, that's up to them. And you kind of see your role as someone who's trying to protect society from the unruly kind of short-sighted, selfish behavior of immature adolescents. And so you have to enforce strict discipline and use strong external rewards or punishments. In the bottom right is what I call the protector mindset. This is the idea that you think, well, young people have been through so much. They're stressed out. They're traumatized. They can't do very much. Let's just protect them from all that stress. If they're anxious, let's remove that. Let's give them step-by-step confidence. Okay. But the problem is then it comes across as disrespectful because adolescents know that you're not respecting them. You're holding them to low standards. Similarly, the enforcer comes across as disrespectful because all but the top performers end up getting yelled at or punished, right? And everyone feels unsupported. So that's also feels disrespectful. Apathetic mindset is just garbage, so don't do that. That's the bottom left. But the mentor mindset comes across as really respectful because it's like, I care about you enough and I have high enough standards for you that I think you can do this. And I'm going to walk the journey with you until you do. And so that feels respectful because adolescents feel challenged, they feel taken seriously, and they also feel supported as they try to meet rigorous learning standards. Now, of course, these styles have had different names in the literature over the years. Kim Scott calls, the mentor radical candor. Fernita Ware called it warm demander. And that's fine. I'm not trying to be, colonialist about language here. I will say I prefer the mindset term though, because in the previous research with all these other terms, they talk about styles. And I understand why. But a style is something that it feels like you inherited or learned early as a child and that it's a part of you like a trait. And I think of these as more coming from beliefs, that if I believe adolescents are incompetent and can't do anything, then I either enforce strict standards to force them to do it, or I protect them by not asking them to do anything. But if I believe young people are capable of great things with the right support, then a mentor mindset makes more sense. So I actually think I like the mindset terminology, not because I think we need more mindsets in the world, but because I really do think they grow out of belief systems that shape how we end up acting toward young people. Let me just show you a quick example of what this looks like, how to have the high standards, high support. Here's an experiment you may have heard about. This is conducted with Jeffrey Cohen, Valerie Purdy-Vons, now Valerie Purdy-Greenaway, and others. In this study, we had adolescents write a first draft history paper in their social studies class. This one was about MLK, and the teachers covered it in comments. And They did positive stuff. They did negative stuff. They basically did their version of the compliment sandwich, right? But our hypothesis is that that's not really a sandwich anyone wants to eat. We don't just want to give a bunch of bland praise. You want to also make it clear that someone can meet the higher standard. And so half of students got a handwritten note from teachers that said, I'm giving you these comments because I have high standards and I know that you can meet them. And then half of students got a control note that just said, I'm giving you these comments so you have feedback. Now, critically, there's two parts here in the treatment note, the WISE feedback note. One is the appeal to the high standards. The other is the assurance that with the right support, they can meet that standard. Okay, so it's the standard and the support. And what we find compared to this control, which just conveys no new information, is that a week later, adolescents were twice as likely to revise their essays. This is a sign of engagement, right? And think about this. In the control, 100% of students got critical feedback. Teachers spent a lot of time revising the essays, right? But in the control, 60% of the time, kids didn't even turn in a revised essay, okay? And again, this goes back to this point of, we can have like automated tutors all we want to give students feedback on all the flaws in their writing and hope they'll fix it. But like people's default is to dislike critical feedback. And the most likely scenarios, kids are like, I don't want to work with this super rigorous AI tutor that's making me feel dumb, like I'm not good enough, right? Or I'll just outsource it to AI myself and not take the feedback. In the WISE feedback group, though, again, same feedback, same teachers, students were twice as likely to take the feedback to heart and make changes. Okay. And this is really encouraging because it suggests that a lot of the work we're doing to try to give students criticism and help them grow might kind of grow in more fertile soil if we first created a context in which adolescents' ears are open to the feedback. For instance, by using what we call a mentor mindset. On top of this, we saw a gap reduction between Black and white students, which we attribute to the fact that previously students of color in the school had been disciplined more harshly for the same incidents, and that had created a kind of distrust of teachers among students of color. But when WISE feedback was applied, then it improved trust. And because trust was improved, then students they had their ears opened to the criticism. They were more receptive to that information. So here's a way to kind of summarize educational styles. Let's just compare mentor and enforcer and why I think mentor is more respectful. In a mentor mindset, the overall approach is what I call collaborative troubleshooting. Teachers are like, let's take a look at what went wrong and see what happened and see what happens if we fix it. Okay, so it's like a good auto mechanic who's kind of curious and tinkering to figure out the source of the problem, because they want the car to work. The enforcer mindset is what I call go try harder alone. So that's more like the idea of, I already told you what to do. I was really clear. I gave you a bunch of assignments. You didn't do it. I'm not going to help you until you help yourself. So go do the work and then come back to me. Okay. Now I understand why teachers do that. They want to teach character and accountability. But the problem is students sitting there and they might be like, dude, I just don't understand nonlinear functions. Can you please explain them to me without yelling at me? Right? So it comes across as disrespectfully when we use that enforcer mindset. Also in the mentor mindset, the implied source of the student's confusion is the process. It's the result of incorrect steps for solving the problem. And therefore we're going to troubleshoot to fix them. Whereas in an enforcer, the problem is character. The students lacked attention. They don't care. They're not putting in effort. And so that leads teachers to be more likely to blame students, leave them to their own devices, say, it's not my fault, you failed, etc. And of course, that comes across as disrespectful because if a student is working in good faith and is authentically confused, they don't want to be accused of having poor character. In a mentor mindset, also, mistakes are useful. They're like learning opportunities. So in a mentor mindset, a teacher says something like, I'm so glad you told me about this mistake because now I know how I can explain it differently to the class. And I'm excited going forward to improve this lesson and help students like you to do better. Okay, so mistakes are like exciting launching off points. In an enforcer mindset, mistakes mean either you're in the wrong class / you're not smart enough, or you weren't paying attention when I explained it to you. So mistakes are not good. They're flaws. Finally, what about low achievers questions? In a mentor mindset, a low achievers question is an exciting chance to clarify something for the whole class or for the teacher to get better at teaching the concept, right? Or for me to show you how much I care for you and how much I'm invested in you. In an enforcer mindset, questions slow the class down. In an enforcer classroom, you see things like, look, don't raise your hand and ask that question. Everyone else knows the answer to it. The fact that you don't know the answer means you weren't paying attention when I explained it 5 minutes ago. So don't disrupt the class and slow everybody down because you were screwing around. Okay. And again, I get why people do that. You hear this kind of thing all the time in classrooms. But the point isn't whether or not a teacher is justified in saying that. The point is that it comes across disrespectfully. And you've basically turned off the entire adolescent brain with that communication. You've done the grown-splaining, nagging study to the teenager, and they're not thinking about how to change. And if your goal is engage students who want to learn, then it's just not a wise thing to do, even if it's justified. So how do we go from like a one-time feedback note to this whole culture of mentor mindset? That's why we developed the Fuse program. And I'll just end with a little bit of results, and then we'll go to Ryan, who can share about the mechanics of how the program works. But basically, we had done all this research, and we thought, don't just make it a study. Don't just make it like, a little module. Make it something that could live in the real world that people can use. Because for us researchers, we're constantly creating new innovations like wise feedback, but we want people to use them. And so this is the first time that our research group has said, we're going to actually create a program offering developed initially by research, evaluated and tested with research, but then make it publicly available. And so that's why we're so eager to get the word out, is because we don't want these insights to live on a shelf in a dusty binder. We want them to come to life and help students. What we learned is that to create a mentor mindset culture or a culture of learning, yes, we need to start with teachers' beliefs. So that's their mindset. Do they believe students are capable of rigorous work? But they need to do two other things for the pyramid to stand. Okay, this is a pyramid, by the way. It's like 3D. It's coming at you, in case you didn't realize our graphic art. So the way this works is that you believe something, but you also need to use language and communication that transparently communicates those beliefs to students. So it's like wise feedback. Teachers probably believed that they were supporting students, but they didn't clarify it out loud. And so the note had a big impact, in part because it clarified something that was true. Here, too, we're saying you have to be 2 to 3 times more transparent in your communication than you think you need to be. In addition, the bottom right is policies and procedures. Adolescents look at where the rubber meets the road. And if they think we are phonies, if they think we are saying, yeah, everyone can grow here, but we don't actually create a culture in which that's true, then they will think we're hypocrites. They'll be offended. They'll discredit what we've said. So it's not just what you privately believe and what you say, it's also your policies. Can students get points back after they make a mistake, right? Are you going to punish students for this or that? And so we think, though, with those 3 things, then you can have a solid foundation for a mentor mindset culture. What have we found? We found first that the Fuse program reduced teachers' fixed mindset by 25%, especially strikingly large effects for teachers who started out with more of a fixed mindset, which is really exciting because the fixed mindset teachers were the ones that we were most worried about. Next, we found that Fuse teachers have student-rated cultures that are more respectful, and also students report less math anxiety, with largest effects for students who are taught by teachers who started out with a fixed mindset. Again, the ones we were most concerned about. When we administered a math test, this is a test developed by Bill Schmidt, who created a lot of items in curriculum alignment for the TIMSS and the PISA, major international assessments. We found that students did better on these math tests when they had a Fuse teacher compared to a non-Fuse teacher. And furthermore, we found that we had about a 50% reduction in the achievement disparity between Black and white students. So all students did better, but especially students of color and also girls in highly rigorous math classes where they might experience identity threats. So I'm going to end there and hand it over to Ryan to say more about the program, but I'm really excited to have shared this information with you and looking forward to staying engaged. And again, I just want to say, what we want more than anything is to be able to share this program and these insights with the world. And we really hope that people are interested in bringing it to their schools. And if there's anything about it that you think, it's a kind of a fit, maybe not, we're open to creating new versions of it. And so we're really in an R&D phase. And so we'd love to hear your ideas. So thank you very much. And then Ryan, you can take it away for the rest of the time.